Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, Cyberpunk 2077 has just received the latest 1.2 update or patch or whatever you want to call it, and if you check out the CD Projekt Red website, there are certainly a lot of changes that have been made to the game. Now, I couldn't help but wonder whether or not performance has been affected as well, and I didn't intend to make a video initially, so I recorded a couple of figures just for my own sort of personal reference, and then I thought, why not make this video anyway? So first of all, I want to share a couple of figures with you that I recorded just after this patch came out. Now, the first set of figures are taken from the minimum specs PC, which consists of the i5 2500K and the GTX 780, along with 8 gigs of DDR3 dual channel RAM. As you can see here, there are no real changes as far as that system setup is concerned. We did notice a slightly higher 0.1% low. I guess this is sort of within a margin of error because the game didn't really feel any less stuttery per se. I also took a couple of figures from the GTX 960 that we tested a couple of days ago just to see if using this GPU with my usual i5 10400F would actually make a difference in terms of the frame rates and things, and unfortunately that was not the case. We pretty much saw exactly the same performance with motorbikes. We pretty much saw the exact same performance with the 960 with the 1.2 patch as we did with the 1.12 patch that came previously. So now I want to get into some actual gameplay and talk about a few other hardware combinations as well. We're going to start with the Ryzen 5 3400G because this is possibly where we saw the biggest change in performance here. So let's get straight into it and discuss how the Cyberpunk 1.2 patch has affected performance, if at all. Now, the main focus of my tests today was lower end or more entry level hardware because this is where any differences in performance will of course be most important. Who cares if an RTX 3090 is getting a 2 FPS boost in performance when it has always been able to handle the game at over 100 FPS anyway, right? Anyway, we'll start off then with the 3400G, which luckily arrived with me last night. Now, this has integrated Vega graphics, and the first thing I'm noticing from the previous version of the game, or something that's different from the previous version of the game I should say, is higher CPU usage and system memory usage. The GPU is the bottleneck anyway here, often maxing out at 100%, but it seems as though we did see a little bit of an improvement over version 1.12. Now, it's nothing spectacular, but there were less stutters with this chip this time around, which is always welcome with hardware that's on the fence between playable and unplayable frame rates. There were still drops, don't get me wrong, and the frame time graph tells you everything you need to know, but any improvement is always welcome. I'm using 3200 MHz memory, so faster RAM would likely increase these figures. For my next test, I switched back to the i5 10400F, which I use on a daily basis, but this time I made use of the weakest modern-ish card that I currently have in my collection. This is the RX 550 test, not to be confused with the 5500. This 4GB GPU still surprises me on occasion, though it really struggles sometimes as well. It's no surprise that at 1080p with full render scaling we saw no changes to the average frame rate or percentile figures, because 1920 by 1080 is simply too much for this card when it comes to running Cyberpunk 2077. However, turn things down to 50% scaling and you might just be in for a treat. The average FPS was improved ever so slightly, though it was the 1% low that benefited the most. Now, you could certainly argue that these results are all within a margin of error, and to some extent I'd agree, as it's impossible to replicate the exact same scenario twice. We can take the same route, do the same things, and try and reduce the variables as much as possible, but there is no built-in benchmark function to ensure that we are doing everything the same as before. As you know, I've always been one for real-time tests anyway, but it's important to remember that these few frames difference could be attributed to slightly altered scenarios. With that said, I've certainly noticed bug fixes, that's for sure. There used to be a specific point on the map where I'd find an NPC floating above his car. He's gone. I've also spoken to a friend whose crashing issue has been resolved. On the other side of the coin though, I've also read reports of worse performance since the patch, but of course I can only really comment on what I've experienced today. So I then created a situation whereby the CPU was the bottleneck using a Pentium G6400 and my RTX 2060. When this game first came out, I couldn't even load a save game with a dual-core hyper-threaded CPU. This did of course get fixed in an earlier update, but even if there's no performance difference today, I'll always be thankful for that fix. According to my tests, I did actually get a higher average frame rate with the G6400, but the experience is far from smooth. This was to be expected. There is no problem with averaging over 30 FPS, and there wasn't with the previous patch either, but the two physical cores do play havoc with this game, and in reality, you're probably going to be pairing this chip with something weaker than a 2060 anyway, so the frame rate will be a little worse than what you're seeing here. That's why, for my final test, I paired it with a GTX 960. This 2GB card will struggle a little more than its 4GB counterpart, but it still hits a plus 30 FPS average in combination with Intel's Pentium Gold CPU, though locking the frame rate to 30 FPS would certainly be the better bet here, so that various frame dips and stutters that occur don't feel as significant. Overall, the latest Cyberpunk patch, version 1.2, has definitely fixed some of the bugs I've been noticing, and I'd recommend giving the update notes a read for yourselves, as well as seeing how performance has changed on your hardware. I'd love to hear your experiences down below. Has the game got smoother for you? Has it got worse? Does it refuse to start altogether? Leave a comment letting me know, and hopefully we can build a bigger picture of how 1.2 changes things, and in the future we can then compare the next patch to all of the results today as well. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it helps any of you out who are looking to purchase Cyberpunk. You haven't done so yet because you are waiting for performance patches. I just want to let you know then that it's probably not going to perform too differently, if at all, to what you have read about. If you've looked at benchmarks of certain cards, then that is probably still what you can expect for the most part. However, I'm glad to see that CD Projekt Red are working on fixing this game, constantly introducing updates, and I'm sure that we will see even more improvements to come in the future. The game itself, in my opinion, is still pretty fun. It's a pretty interesting game to say the least, and perhaps I'll even do a few comparisons between the PC version and the original Xbox One version at some point, just to see how things differ when it comes to that console. If you enjoyed this one, then leave a like on it down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.